शुक्लांबरधरं विष्णुं शशिवर्णं चतुर्भुजं प्रसन्नवदनं ध्यायेत् सर्वविघ्नोपशान्तये। ॐ सिन्दूरारुणविग्रहां त्रिनयनां माणिक्यमौलिस्फुरत्तारानायकशेखरां स्मितमुखीमापीनवक्षोरुहां पाणिभ्यां मलिपूर्णरत्नचषकं रक्तोत्पलं बिभ्रतीं सौम्यां रत्नघटस्थरक्तचरणां ध्यायेत् परामम्बिकाम्। ॐ ध्यायेन्नित्यं महेशं रजतगिरिनिभं चारुचन्द्रावतंसं रत्नाकल्पोज्ज्वलाङ्गं परशुमृगवरभीतिहस्तं प्रसन्नं पद्मासीनं समन्तात् स्तुतममरगणैः व्याघ्रकृत्तिं वसानं विश्वाद्यं विश्वबीजं निखिलभयहरं पञ्चवक्त्रं त्रिनेत्रम्। ॐ नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुर्गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादं शङ्करं लोकशङ्करम्। ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः पार्थो वत्ससुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत्।
धृतराष्ट्र उवाच धर्मक्षेत्रे कुरुक्षेत्रे समवेतायुयुत्सवः मामका पाण्डवाश्चैव किमकुर्वत सञ्जय। श्रीभगवानुवाच क्लैप्यमास्मगमः पार्थ नैतत्त्वय्युपपद्यते क्षिप्रं हृदय दौर्बल्यं त्यक्त्वोत्तिष्ठ परन्तप। अर्जुनोवाच किं तत् ब्रह्म किमध्यात्मं किं कर्म पुरुषोत्तम अधिभूतं च किं प्रोक्तम् अधिदैवं किमुच्यते। श्रीभगवानुवाच अक्षरं ब्रह्म परमं स्वभावोऽध्यात्मम् उच्यते भूतभावोद्भवकरो विसर्गः कर्म संगितः। अर्जुनोवाच अधियज्ञः कथं कोत्र देहेऽस्मिन् मधुसूदन प्रयाणकाले च कथं ज्ञेयोऽसि नियतात्मभिः। श्रीभगवानुवाच अधिभूतं क्षरो भावः पुरुषश्चाधिदैवतम् अधियज्ञोऽहमेवात्र देहे देहभृतां वर अन्तकाले च मामेव स्मरन् मुक्त्वा कलेवरम् यः प्रयाति समद्भावं याति नास्त्यत्र संशयः यं यं वापि स्मरन् भावं त्यजत्यन्ते कलेवरं तं तमेवैति कौन्तेय सदा तद्भावभावितः अभ्यासयोगयुक्तेन चेतसा नान्यगामिना परमं पुरुषं दिव्यं याति पार्थानुचिन्तयन् प्रयाणकाले मनसाचलेन भक्त्या युक्तो योगबलेन चैव भ्रुवोर्मध्ये प्राणम् अवेश्य सम्यक् स तं परं पुरुषम् उपैति दिव्यम् सर्वद्वाराणि संयम्य मनोहृदि निरुध्य च मूर्धन्याधायात्मनः प्राणम् आस्थितो योगधारणाम् मामुपेत्य पुनर्जन्म दुःखालयम् अशाश्वतम् नाप्नुवन्ति महात्मानः संसिद्धिं परमां गताः अग्निज्योतिरः शुक्लः षण्मासा उत्तरायणम् तत्र प्रयाता गच्छन्ति ब्रह्मविदो जनाः धूमो रात्रिस्तथा कृष्णः षण्मासा दक्षिणायनम् तत्र चान्द्रमसं ज्योतिः योगी प्राप्य निवर्तते शुक्लकृष्णे गतीयेते जगतः शाश्वते मते एकया यात्यनावृत्तिम् अन्यया वर्तते पुनः नैते सृति पार्थ जानन् योगी मुह्यति कश्चन तस्मात् सर्वेषु कालेषु योगयुक्तो भवार्जुन वेदेषु यज्ञेषु तपस्सु चैव दानेषु यत्पुण्यफलं प्रदिष्टम् अत्येति तत्सर्वम् इदं विदित्वा योगी परं स्थानम् उपैति चात्यम् इदं तु ते गुह्यतमं प्रवक्ष्याम्यनसूयवे ज्ञानं विज्ञानसहितं यज्ञात्वा मोक्ष्यसे शुभात् राजविद्या राजगुह्यं पवित्रम् इदम् उत्तमम् प्रत्यक्षावगमं धर्म्यं सुसुखं कर्तुम् अव्ययम् अश्रद्धानाः पुरुषा धर्मस्यास्य परन्तप अप्राप्य मां निवर्तन्ते मृत्यु संसारवर्त्मनि सर्वभूतानि कौन्तेय प्रकृतिं यान्ति मामिकाम् कल्पक्षये पुनस्तानि कल्पादौ विसृजाम्यहम् न च मां तानि कर्माणि निबन्धन्ति धनञ्जय उदासीनवदासीनम् असक्तं तेषु कर्मसु अवजानन्ति मां मूढा मानुषीं तनुमाश्रितम् परं भावम् अजानन्तो मम भूतमहेश्वरम् महात्मानस्तु मां पार्थ दैवीं प्रकृतिमाश्रिताः भजन्त्य अनन्यमनसो ज्ञात्वा भूतादिमव्ययम् अहं क्रतुरहं यज्ञः स्वधाहं हम औषधम् मन्त्रोऽहं हमे वाज्यम् अहमग्निरहं हुतम् पिताहमस्य जगतो माता धाता पितामहः वेद्यं पवित्रम् ओंकार ऋक्साम यजुरेव च गतिर्भर्ता प्रभुः साक्षी निवासः शरणं सुहृत् प्रभवः प्रलयः स्थानं निधानं बीजमव्ययम् अनन्याश्चिन्तयन्तो मां ये जनाः पर्युपासते तेषां नित्याभियुक्तानां योगक्षेमं वहाम्यहम् येऽप्यन्यदेवता भक्ता यजन्ते श्रद्धयान्विताः ते अपि मामेव कौन्तेय यजन्त्य विधिपूर्वकम् अहं हि सर्वयज्ञानां भोक्ता च प्रभुरेव च न तु मामभिजानन्ति तत्त्वेनातश्च्यवन्ति ते समोऽहं सर्वभूतेषु न मे द्वेष्योऽस्ति न प्रियः ये भजन्ति तु मां भक्त्या मयि ते तेषु चाप्यहम् अपि चेत् सुदाचारो भजते मामनन्यभाक् साधुरेव समन्तव्यः सम्यक् व्यवसितो हि सः क्षिप्रं भवति धर्मात्मा शश्वच्छान्तिं निगच्छति कौन्तेय प्रतिजानीहि न मे भक्तः प्रणश्यति मन्मना भव मद्भक्तो मद्याजी मां नमस्कुरु मामे वैश्यसि युक्तैत्वम् आत्मानं मत्परायणः.
Thank you, Resi. Hey, Rakesh, can you put up the last verses one more time, or whoever has? Huh. Thank you. So don't deprive me of my part. So that api chet suduracharo, that refers to me. So please say suduracharo correctly. The very wicked one, even if such a person exists, but he worships me, then he should be considered a sadhu. This applies to me, so don't miss me out. I like this verse very much because it applies directly to me. So I am very attached to this verse. Really, I'm not kidding. This is the feeling you have when you actually enjoy the Lord's blessing.
Shankar sir, can you explain the meaning of it one more time, please? This is Pratibha here.
Yes, hi Pratibha. Yes. Api chet. And if there is someone who is considered very wicked, engaging in sinful and impious activities, but who worships me, bhajate mam, ananya bhak, without a break. That person, sadhureva samantavya, such a person should be considered a good person because his direction is now right. His path has been set right. In time, he will improve.
Okay.
Even though right now he's very wicked. So I'm very attached to this verse.
Got it. Thank you.
Dr. Shankar, if you're saying such things, what will happen of us?
No, that is not true. You are all much better. If you examine, you can tell yourself. Definitely. This is a very beautiful verse. So anyway, I love this verse very much. Thank you, Resi. Yeah. So that's why I put it there also in the selection. Truly, and this is a fact, unfortunately, that when we reflect and truly understand, just recently I was reading one Kabir Doha also. I don't know how many of you have heard of the singer Abida Parveen. My sister shared one very beautiful set of songs. I will share with you on Satsang or on the Gita class group. If you like that kind of music, it is very, very moving. And the dohas also have very deep meaning. And in one of them, of course, it has that one, right? Bura jo dekhan mein chal. The echoing is the same, feeling. Thank you. Okay, I thought today we will move forward with our beautiful reading of Bhakti Yoga, Yoga of Devotion. Is everyone doing well and enjoying so far? I hope. Right.
Yes, Dr. Shankar, we are enjoying the recitations very much.
Very good. Wonderful. I also like the fact that you're all chanting very nicely because that preamble sets the mood very well for reading. And sometimes listening to the Bhagavad Gita in continuity, once we have read it and understood the meaning, it has a very beautiful logic of it. So both are nice. Achha, so we were reading Dwadasha Adhyay, and I think we finished 12:12. Am I right?
Ji.
And it's worth, I will try to recap briefly for my own memory. So I believe the chapter started with Sri Arjuna asking the difference between those who worship the imperishable and those Nirguna Brahman, and those who worship the Saguna Brahman as Bhagavan Sri Krishna. So who is the best, right? Who is the better one? Yogavit Tamaha. And Bhagavan, of course, diplomatically answers the question that those who worship me are the best integrated, but that is not to mean that those who worship the imperishable are any less, right? Because they are his very self, right? He only says that toil is harder, but those who surrender. So he says, their toil is harder. He says they attain me indeed. Mameva prapnuvanti. Those who worship the imperishable. But then he says, those who, however, surrender all works to me, make me their supreme goal and worship me, I will deliver from the sea of samsara, right? Samsara sagarat, mrityu samsara sagarat. So he says, let me give you a recipe. So nowadays, when we teach in the classes, it's very funny. There's a strong analogy. So first I try to teach the laws and the principles, right? So this is law of conservation of mass. And then we state the law and we write it as an equation, right? Then we say law of conservation of linear momentum. But what I find really works for students is a recipe. So they want to know, if I look at a problem, first draw the system or the control volume. 2, identify the unit normal vectors. 3, identify the whether it's a steady flow or unsteady flow. So this kind of recipe, 11, 12 points. This they find very useful to solve the problems, right? They are not able to sometimes translate the law into the sequence of steps. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Essentially, we use the principle to solve the problem, but undergraduate students need it broken down into several steps. If you come to the graduate class, we don't do that kind of recipe teaching. It's assumed that you've learned that in the undergraduate class. By graduate class, you don't need the recipes anymore, right? So Bhagavan now is breaking it down into a recipe. He says, okay, here's what you do. Recipe, fix your mind on me alone. Let your understanding be absorbed in me. Henceforth, doubtless, in me alone will you dwell. Right? Then he says, okay, if this is too hard, this is one level recipe. I'll give you even more finer, simpler recipe. Right? If you're unable to concentrate your mind through the yoga of repeated efforts, if you're unable to concentrate your mind steadfastly through the yoga of repeated efforts, then devote yourself wholly to my works. Right? So, for instance, what we're doing now. What are we doing now? This is Krishna's work. Listening to the words of the Lord is his work. Right? Okay. So, but then he says, even by doing my works for my sake, you will achieve perfection. He says, suppose if resorting to union with me, you're unable to do even this, then with self-control, renounce the fruits of all works to me. Right? That's why in the Vedas, when it says karma kand, the karma in the karma kand of the Vedas is God's work. Right? Those works which we do, which are not in the karma kand, are a different kind of work. That is not what the Upanishads and the Vedas refer to as karma strictly. Right? But the Lord gives a recipe for engaging in those works. He says, when you do those, give up the fruits to me. Don't expect anything from it. In fact, even that which we do in the Vedic rites, we are supposed to give up the fruits. But since we don't do those rites anymore, the only choice is to give up the fruits of the non-Vedic works. Right? Okay. So this is the intention. Now, having summarized this, he now gives a summary of these different paths. And I think last time I mentioned that, the path when you're going inwards, when we first start and we say, okay, Advaita Vedanta is the top, Jnana Yoga. We said, okay, first practice some Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Seva, to purify the mind, to do Chitta Shuddhi. bhakti to develop this feeling of upasana in the heart, right? Because as I mentioned, without that bhakti and upasana, if one embarks on the path of very stringent hatha and raja yoga, when there are certain fears and things when they arise, the person who has not done the upasana, akritopasaka, will have problems, right? Nowadays, people are dashing headlong into Kundalini yoga and other things without thinking about this. And then those practices also get a bad name, because sometimes people go crazy, they act like nuts, they go into mental asylum, they have psychosis, they're not able to honor their day-to-day commitments to their people who are dependent on them, right? And so the old ancient masters, the rishis, the starting from Adinath, Gorakhnath, Matsyendranath, these people, they recognized this point. They said, first establish bhakti. If you read, we've read in Tripura Rahasya, in which Parashurama approaches Dattatreya. And first, what does Dattatreya tell him? He tells him to worship for 12 years the Devi, right? After that 12-year worship, then Parashurama says, well, I don't understand what this person Samadhi tried to tell me when I was passing him. Then he says, okay, now come, I will teach you the secrets. Now that you've done this, Kritopasaka. Anyway, there are still ways, those are ideals, but nevertheless, the Lord is gracious. And the time may be different for different people, depending on the karmic load. But these are prescribed. Then we say Hatha Yoga to control the passions, as in Aparokshana Bhuti, Raj Yoga, Jnana. This leads to the knowledge, and then Vijnanam. This then reflects in the person's attitude towards their life, their work, the way they conduct themselves, right? The evidence of the Jnanam is in the external behavior also, right? Vijnanam. So what Bhagavan is saying is, if that first path was very hard, it will be quite easy if you just apply the principles of that knowledge in your day-to-day life. It works both ways. It's a dual channel, right? Applying certain efforts leads to a certain result. Mimicking the result also leads to the same, end goal. That's what he's saying here. But he wants to make some things clear, which is what is this status of knowledge? And we have to be a little careful here, because the word jnanam here is used in a slightly different sense than the true Brahma Jnanam in verse 12. Shreyo hi jnanam abhyasat. Jnanat dhyanam vishishyate. Dhyanat karma phalatyagah. Tyagat shanti nirantaram. Now, in the first round, I told you, he extolled Jnanam itself, Sankhya Yoga. He gave the Brahma Vidya. But Arjuna was not ready to receive it. He kept asking questions. If Arjuna's mind had been purified to the, where they say it is as pure as a camphor, so that when the light of knowledge touches the camphor, what happens? It burns up. If Arjuna had been in that state, Bhagavad Gita would have been only second chapter. Nothing after that. Nothing more to say. Right? But Arjuna kept asking. And so Bhagavan said, okay, if you can't do Jnanam, then I will teach you Yoga Abhyas. If you can't take Yoga Abhyas, then I will teach you Hatha Yoga. And if you can't take even Hatha Yoga well, let me teach you Bhakti, which is what this chapter is about. Bhakti Yoga. And then he said, well, clearly this sequence has not worked for you. Okay, so let's take another approach. Okay, let me extol. See, our natural thing is we always want the best, right? So if I give you a set of paths and I say this one is best, you will want to follow it, right? Yes or no? You will take the advice of the guru. So what he's saying is, Acha, this didn't work. Okay, let me teach you another way, which is this one will be best for you. That's what he's doing. So when people read the Gita, they think there is a contradiction in the Gita. If you actually take this verse and map it back to what we read in the second chapter, it will seem like a contradiction. There are many such instances, but it's only when we have that deep understanding and guidance that we can understand it's not contradictory actually. He is giving the right instruction for the mind of the aspirant at that time. So let's see what he says. So he's saying, I'll just read the English translation mostly. This is the commentary. Shreyaha iti. Shreyaha hi prashasyataram jnanam kasmat. Superior or more praiseworthy is knowledge. Than what? Than repeated efforts without discrimination. So there the abhyas is effort without discrimination. In fact, discrimination is an interesting thing. Vivekam, we've been talking about it in a practical sense on the sequence in Advaita Vedanta also, right? Better than knowledge is meditation guided by knowledge, okay? And so in that sense, he's saying jnana dhyanam vishise. Dhyanam is meditation. Okay? It is understood that superior to the meditation of the man of knowledge is the renunciation of the fruits of works. Thus is peace born of the renunciation of the fruits of works, qualified as stated in verse 11. Then takes place the quiescence of empirical life and its cause. It is not postponed to a later hour. And this is absolutely true. At the end of the day, even after one has seen the Lord, as long as empirical life continues, this renunciation of works, fruits of the works, has to be done, right? Otherwise, the quiescence is not achieved. Then next, 12.2. The renunciation of the fruits of works has been prescribed as the means to spiritual well-being in respect of the ignorant man engaged in works, who is unable to undertake the spiritual discipline set forth above. This is the power of the commentary. Why in this chapter is renunciation to works being elevated? Whereas in chapter 2, he gave Gyan directly. Because it is recommended in respect of the ignorant man engaged in works who is unable to undertake the spiritual discipline set forth above. Shreya sadhanam iti upadishtam. It was not commended right at the start. And so this renunciation is extolled as a step in which the series of means set forth in the words knowledge is superior, etc. culminates in 12.12. It is prescribed as fit for one who cannot take up the richer complex of means. On the basis of which attribute is this passage a commendation of the fruits of works, of renunciation of fruits of works? According to Kathopanishad, when all desires are rejected. Okay, so this one we should read. Yada sarve pramuchyante iti sarva kama prahanat amritatvam uktam tat prasiddham Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. When all desires are rejected, immortality is held to result from the renunciation of all desires. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad has also proclaimed this truth. Objects of desires are the fruits of works enjoined by Shruti and Smriti. So what that means is, they will give it as an example. Putra Kameshti Yagam. You know this famous yajna that Dasharatha performed in desire of having progeny, children. So you perform the yajna and the fruit of the yajna is children, right? As long as the doer of the yajna is intent on getting the fruits and disappointed if the fruits don't accrue, right? That is considered not renunciation of the fruits, right? So doing the work with great devotion and engagement as a work of the Lord and not looking necessarily for the outcome is the ultimate attitude of renunciation. So the work itself is not renounced. The work is done with great care and attention and devotion and full engagement. But the outcome is not allowed to affect the mental state, which is very difficult, right? This is actually the greatest, in fact, this is the most difficult sadhana, if you think about it. because we are so used, and actually you can take a little leaf out of the modern understanding of our brain. How many of you have heard of something called the reward circuit in the brain? Yes, Pranav, Shalabh, would you like to share a little bit?
It's
Go ahead.
related to how we, I mean, I'm not sure actually, but if you keep on doing certain things, then your circuitry develops in a certain way. And after a point, it's not just the question of reward. If you don't do those things, then it becomes painful, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Is it also similar to the reinforcement theory where you kind of like in animals, for example, if there is a certain behavior and it is rewarded, then the animal behaves the same manner every time
Right.
that behavior is produced.
Right. So there is you're right. From behavioral therapy, how habits form, basically.
Right.
And the one you're talking about is more like the Pavlovian,
Mhm.
observing the animals.
Yep.
Nowadays, there has been such a lot of research inside the brain itself, imaging the brain and imaging the parts of the brain that light up. And so we now know there is something called the nucleus accumbens, which is the reward center. And maybe Pranav wants to share something. He raised his hand too, please.
Yes, Professor. So more on like same like that dopamine, that hormonal release which happens.
Right.
That same sort of behavior triggers it again and again. And
Right.
after a point, even if the reward is not there, that still that hormonal that circuit will still activate, even though there is no external reward as such.
Right. So Pranav raises a very good point. This modern brain research shows that there are certain neurotransmitters involved in our brain which create certain feelings. So dopamine is a very strongly implicated neurotransmitter which actually helps us seek out new experiences. It is very key for our exploring new spaces, finding food, etc. And these actually operate very uh, deep inside the brain. They are not consciously, we are not aware of them, these things, unless you are deep in meditation, right? So meditation helps us observe these operations of the mind and the brain. Now this uh, dopamine is one neurotransmitter, and it has a certain level in the brain, right? Too low is not good, too high is also not good in terms of normal functioning of the human being or animals, right? Too low means that person is very lethargic. They won't even get up. Rats that have low dopamine won't even eat food if put in front of them. That's not good, right? Once that dopamine is high, it will make the rat go out and seek the food. So the rat eats the food. When it eats the food, then a new neurotransmitter is released, which may be any of the complex of serotonin. There is norepinephrine. There is the entire mechanism is not fully understood, but these are all involved. There is GABA, glutamate, etc., etc. Right? All these neurotransmitters get released, and the net feeling of satiety, happiness results. Right? And so now the mind or the brain, through its neurochemistry, teaches the mind that if you do this, you will get satiety. Now, originally this was evolved in the hunter-gatherer type time, where what were the main primitive fountains, as Swami Rama puts it. Swami Rama calls 4 primitive fountains: food, sex, sleep, shelter, security. These are very, very primitive. See, if we don't have shelter and security, then a certain level of cortisol increases in the brain, which creates a high degree of stress, and adrenaline will increase. These are very traumatic to the brain. The sympathetic nervous system gets activated. Such people complain about constant anxiety, constant stress. It's very damaging to the system, right? On the other hand, parasympathetic nervous system can calm it down. And pranayam, which works directly with the vagus nerve, when you do diaphragmatic breathing, proper pranayam, automatically it brings down heart rate, it regularizes the heart rate, it regularizes all the internal organs through the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So these the yogis knew a long time ago. But we were talking about reward center. So the point is that the way this reward center is thus constructed, it actually creates pathways in the brain. So when the neurons, when they fire together, they start creating tracks, like train tracks. They say neurons that fire together wire together. Okay. This is good insofar as we are looking for food. When we were in the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, it protected us in some very important ways. If you encountered a wild animal, you had the fight or flight response, which is there deep in the limbic brain, right? When you had food, you got satiety. So now you knew that I have to go get food, and it's a good thing. Secondly, actually, it also taught us another bad thing, which is if you find food, eat lots of it, because you don't know in the hunter-gatherer life when you will find again food, right? These were very primitive structures coded into our brain, right? Then sex. So try to find a mate, because propagation of the species is very important. So this would drive, dopamine will drive it, and there will be satiety, etc. Right? Sleep. We have to sleep, right? Without sleep, all kinds of things get deranged, right? So this reward center is very, very fundamentally built into our thing. So what it means is that it's very difficult to do something without expecting the reward. It's basically going completely against our deepest but primitive biology. You can. And that comes from the prefrontal cortex. This is how human being is different from animals. Because human being can elevate the thinking up here and actually take a path which is oppositional to the limbic brain, to the reptilian brain, to the mammalian brain. These are three classes of brains we talk about, corresponding to the level of evolution. Okay. Reptiles have a certain way of living. You can see they are sluggish. When the sun comes up, they come out, and that's it. Right? But they also eat. They're successful in finding food, right? They're successful in reproducing. They sleep, and they can shelter themselves. This is still a marvel of life. Think about it. It's not a joke. This is coded into them, right? You take the mammals, they're slightly different. Mammals start showing much more different kind of behavior. We see social behavior, we see interaction, we see familial behavior, we see group interaction. Yes or no? This is more evolved. Yes or no? Wouldn't you agree? Chimpanzees and monkeys are very close to us. They're highly evolved, right? So then what is it that distinguishes man, finally, human being? We have all these components in us built in, but we have the last one, the buddhi, which is located in the prefrontal cortex, right? It is only by resorting to that we can delay our gratification. We undertake something today knowing it's good for us, even if we don't get the result right away, right? So what is Bhagavan now asking us for? The ultimate delay of gratification is, what is that ultimate delay? I want the Lord. I'm not seeking for gratification in the life. Do you see what I'm saying? It's possible. After all, the children can say, I don't want candy. You know, what is the big difference between, they say, have you heard this, that children who are able to delay gratification are more successful in life, they say. You know, if a child is very impulsive, then it's difficult for it to be successful as an adult. Of course, you don't want to carry this to extreme. I'm not saying you should torture your child or anything like that. Every person is made differently. But overall, these are conclusions from modern psychology, which are in accord with our scriptures also, right? That slowly, slowly we teach the child, okay, when you're very young, you have to eat when you want to eat, and you get to release your bodily mala, excrements when you want to. Correct or not? We allow that up to a certain age. Then slowly we start saying, well, you can't be so impulsive. You have to control a little bit, exercise control over your voluntary activities. We say, now you have to say, I want to go to the bathroom, be trained, child, right? Don't we? Right? We say you have to have meals only at appropriate times. You can't have a snack all the time. You can't eat only candy, right? So similarly, Bhagavan is now finally telling us, this is my final instruction to you as a human being. You learned all that. Now he's saying, give up your fruits of your works, but work. Now, he's not saying you won't get the fruits of your works. Now, here's an important thing. People think that if I give up the fruits, that means I will not enjoy the fruits. Are they the same thing? They're not. Okay, they're not. If you give up the fruits, you will get something even sweeter, even in this life. Because Bhagavan has said, Yoga Kshemam Vahamyaham. He's not saying that I'm going to torture you like a starving ascetic in this world if you give up the fruits of your actions. He's saying, I will provide enough for you. You will have enough. You may not think it is enough, but you will have enough, right? Which comes back to the dopamine example, which is if we constantly trigger that level of dopamine in the brain, it gets used to it. It can't do with less. So nowadays what happens is many studies show that because of that, because of our culture, modern culture, where everything is available right now, and there are many, many varieties available, right? The mind becomes actually less capable and less capable of getting real enjoyment. There was an article, this series of articles about the curse of choice, basically. We always said in America, choice is better. If you have 21 versions of cereal, types of cereal is better than 20, right? We have taken this as an unalloyed good. But I was just listening to an article on NPR where they said, no, actually, this is not good. It creates a lot of trouble for the human being. That amount of choice, right? It makes them indecisive, actually, less decisive in some ways. So this is one problem. The second one is even things like our cell phones or, the constant alerts and likes. So if I randomly ping your brain with something, okay, the randomness of it creates a certain problem for the mind. It hijacks the dopamine system. So when you sit for 20 minutes and you don't allow anything to come and impose itself on your senses, you do something very marvelous to your brain. Okay? You really slow it down. You start seeing what is really important in life. Okay? You stop listening to the chatter. Okay? I'm trying to explain to you in modern terms. But that's what Bhagavan is saying. He's saying, stop the chatter. Okay? Take it easy. Relax. Meditate. You will know what it is I'm trying to tell you, right? Because otherwise, when this dopamine level gets very high in the brain, beyond normal, then what happens is one is never satiated, right? And already Bhagavan has said, I remember, I think in which chapter, that Kama yesha krodha yesha rajoguna samudbhavaha mahashano mahapapan jnanina nitya vairinam. Do you remember this? Pranav is nodding, right?
Yes, Professor. Yeah.
So what is it? This is desire, he says, kama. And also anger, krodha, which comes from frustration of desire. Rajoguna, it's coming from the guna of rajas, samudbhava. Mahashano, it's a great eater. It's a great fire, actually. It's compared to an anala, right? And it keeps eating. But it's very, he says, sinful, papman, and it's the eternal enemy of the wise, right? Why is that? Because when that stimulation gets more and more and more, it has no end, right? It's like insatiable. So in our Puranas, we have the idea of this Rakta Bija. This Rakta Bija is a demon, right? What does this demon do? Every time he is cut, he drops more. It comes in the Devi Mahatmyam. His blood drops, every drop of blood creates a new Rakta Bija. This is the nature of our desire, unfortunately, right? It's very difficult to stop. Like if you like potato chips or plantain chips, or we all know this, right? We all know it. I'm not saying I'm any special. I have the things I like also, right? If I allow myself, I can eat, right? I love plantain chips with the salt and everything, but you can't stop with one. In fact, there is an advertisers knows this very well. In that Doritos, I think there's an advertisement. You can't stop with one, or is it Frito-Lays? Which one, right? They know this very, very well, that if they hook you, that's their whole job. For God's sake, this entire modern culture is all about that. It's how to make money out of people's desire. It's all there is to it, And whether we attribute a judgment to them or not, we don't have to. We just want to watch out for our own good, right? That's all. This has to come from within. Nobody wants to impose this on anybody. But when you realize your own good benefits by listening to what the Lord is saying here. So the reason why this is very difficult is because the reward system is ingrained within us. But it's ingrained in the lower mind, in the lower brain, in the reptilian brain, right? It also manifests as the mammalian brain. But in the human brain, there is a possibility of mastering it, right? That is what Bhagavan is saying. When we take resort to buddhi, to the objective part of the mind that can view us very, very clearly, and we see our ego and our memory, chitta of experiences, and our importer and exporter of sensations, senses, the manas, and its sankalpa, vikalpa capacity, that it decides one thing, then it says, should I do the other thing? This vacillating part of the mind. When we observe all that within us, we are observing from the standpoint of buddhi. And then we can say, aha, okay, this is how I am actually. So in fact, we can take a moment. Let's take a second and reflect on these parts of the mind. Let's reflect on our sensations. Let's reflect on the mind wants to do something. When we had a dilemma today, should I do this? Should I do that? What part of us gets hurt when somebody says something about us? Why does the arrow strike? There must be an identification with our body and the way that body acts. And then we have a long tape about us, a long set of memories. I am this. Can you say one thing? I am this. I am lazy. I am pretty. I am mean. I am good. I'm virtuous. I'm strong. I'm weak. I'm loving. I'm hateful. Right? Lots of tapes. Long connection of it. Now here's something I was thinking about today. What is the earliest memory we have of I in this body? How far back does it go? Everyone can tell me. What is your earliest memory of I in this body?
Eating. I remember, eating, or, mom feeding.
Right. At what age? At what age?
I remember maybe 4 years, 3 years, 4
4
years.
years, 3 years. Okay. Anyone else? Pretty good. That's pretty far back.
I cannot go beyond 7.
Yeah, I'm like you, Durgeshji. Even 7 is kind of hazy. Anyone else?
I remember
Yes.
sorry, go ahead.
Huh?
Go ahead, Resi. That's okay.
I remember the house where I was born. I think I was 2. I remember the refrigerator in that house.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
2. Women have, I think, a longer memory. Pradeepa?
6, I think. 6 or 7, maybe.
6 or 7. Okay.
Yep.
Anyone else?
I can't go beyond 10 or 12, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
I remember being in kindergarten,
Uh-huh. So 6 or 7.
4 or 5. Yeah,
4 or 5. Okay. Oh, kindergarten. Right. Yeah. 6 will be first grade, right?
right.
Right. Anyone else?
I remember, I don't know which one came first, but I remember one time when I like smashed an egg on the floor. And I also remember like our old sofa.
Uh-huh.
2 years earlier.
How old were you then?
2 or 3.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah.
I feel, Professor, like the older we go, the farther we move from our childhood, I guess.
True.
So your memory is becoming.
I mean, I used to remember things from 5 years when I was in BTech, but not now.
Okay,
Correct.
so 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but let's say 5 years. Okay. There is a memory of having remembered 5 years. Okay, that's interesting. Anyone else?
I think same for me, around 4 or 5 years. I remember my kindergarten.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody remember a 1-year-old? Nobody remembers 1-year-old, right?
I
But
think I do.
yeah.
I think so. My mom used to have chai in the evenings, and I cannot describe, but I have that memory of wanting it, and my mom not giving it to me. I think I was like very small. It's before the memory of remembering that fridge in the house.
I thought I was the chai addict, but here we have a very young chai addict. So, okay, to prove my point, your race is making it hard for me to prove my point. Is there a time in your life after you emerged from the womb that you do not remember as an I? There is. Yes, for everybody. Okay. Now, as we grow older, and you all know this, first of all, Chandogya Upanishad says that at the time of departure, what happens is that the mind and Vach, they separate. So the word association with form breaks down. And we've talked about this, how it's the two sides, Broca's part, left part of the brain, and then the right for the forms, and that these two are connected. And so in a sense, here's the funny thing, have you thought of this? That from that earliest memory till the time our memory dissolves, this is what is actually our life, what we call the life, right? When you look at people with Alzheimer's, there is still life in the body. Pranas are still there, right? But they don't remember. And so then what do we say to them? How do we interact with them? We think that, and from their perspective also, life as normal is not there, right? The same experiences that they had from the time the I formed and they could associate has gone. So when you actually think about it in our human life, what we think of as real right now is actually not permanent. Have you thought about this? There was a time when all this was not there for you, and you were there too, yet. Does that make sense? And there will be a time when all this will not exist for you, even if the life is in your body. I really want you to ponder about this. Right? There can come a time when you all come to me and I don't recognize you. I cannot connect the name and the form. Yes? Alzheimer's is just an extreme example. But this is what our Rishi says happens at the time of departure. Right? So then, but we are taking the things that are happening in this window, even, which is not the entire bodily existence, to be the truth, right? Right? So why do we not normally think of these things? Will you agree that this is not something that you normally talk about in the rest of your life? You only talk about this in satsang, right? The very peculiar person I am, that I bring up these most bizarre observations, right? Why? Why do we take the rest of it to be okay? It's a habit. What Pradeepa said about the rats. The mind is a creature of habit. If you do something often enough, it'll take it for real. I can construct completely alternate realities for you in your mind. All I have to do is adjust a little bit chemicals. Completely, I can transform your reality. I can transform your notion of space and time. I can transform your happiness and sadness. And that is what actually Big Pharma is doing right now. Do you know the number of Americans on psychotropic drugs? It's amazing. So without really solving their problems, we have created a drugged out society, legally prescribed by doctors, right? But it's also a revelation for a yogi, because if by adding all kinds of substances I can change the way I think, then you must question, what is it that I think right now? What is the meaning of this reality? Substance-free reality itself, right? What the yogi teaches is that, in fact, by training the mind, you can alter the biochemical balance within your brain. We are normally so associated with using the physical to change the mental. We never think that the circuit is connected the other way too, that by mental I can change the physical. Right? So, very simple thing. If you learn pranayama properly, I told you, you can activate the parasympathetic nervous system. You can change your heart rate variability. You can change your breathing rate. You can change the level of cortisol in your body, in your brain. You can bring about a sense of calm. So what is this teaching you? It's telling you that by mental control, I can change the biochemicals in my brain. And so I can alter my perception of reality itself. A person who is about to pick up a knife and kill somebody, through deep breathing, can actually be brought to a reasonable state of discussion. Like, don't do this. Why are you so angry? Right? So this we must consider, that the mind and the body are very deeply linked, and that by proper training, we can change our perception of reality itself, and we can change it for our benefit, for the benefit of those around us. And so that, and that's what Bhagavan is saying. By doing this, it's not that you'll be shortchanged. By giving up the fruits of your work, you will not be shortchanged. You will actually have a very beautiful life, but it may be somewhat contrary to your expectation first. That's all, right? We come into this world thinking we need X, Y, Z. Okay, God might give you W, Y, and A. Okay, you think X, Y, Z is what is good for you. God is saying W, Y, A is good for you. That's all, right? And what we say is, that is what we say, accept it as Lord's prasadam, right? Sometimes it may be a little bitter, but we get medicine also, whenever we take, it's not sweet, right? Yeah. Many medicines are bitter, right? So the question is, can we skillfully operate and accept that prasadam? So anyway, finally, let me finish this thing. On renouncing them, the knower established in meditation indeed wins immediate peace. The general feature of renunciation of all desires is shared by the ignorant man's renunciation of fruits also. So, just as the Upanishads say that the knower, the jnani, established in meditation wins immediate peace because of what? The renunciation of all desires. This is shared by the ignorant man's renunciation of fruits also. That's why Bhagavan is extolling it. So even if a person who seems very ignorant externally, but does their duty very nicely, and is not swayed when the fruit, whatever it is, good or bad, that person is a jnani. So that person, somebody who knows this, will be ready to fall at their feet and say, sir, you're a jnani, because you have done this with such a great wisdom, right? So then, hence this praise of the renunciation of the fruits of all works is meant to create a zest for it. For example, the statement that the Brahmana Agastya drank up the sea extols the modern Brahmana too, Brahminhood being the common factor. Similarly, owing to the renunciation of fruits, it is declared that Karma Yoga promotes spiritual well-being. Here, assuming the distinction between self and God, yoga, or the concentration of the mind on the all-pervasive God, has been praised. Also has been praised the performance of works for the sake of God. In 12.11, it is suggested that the worshipper of the imperishable, who perceives no difference, cannot reasonably perform Karma Yoga, as this is an offspring of nescience. Similarly, the Lord shows the impropriety of a Karma Yogi betaking himself to the worship of the imperishable. The verse 12.4, they reach me alone, states that the worshippers of the imperishable freely attain kaivalyam, must be aloneness. While 12.7, I am their deliverer, shows the dependence of others on the Lord. If the worshippers of the imperishable have been assimilated to the Lord, have become his very self, since they see no difference whatsoever, it will be improper to suggest that they are the objects of an act of deliverance. Also, because the Lord, very much concerned with Arjuna's well-being, instructs him only in Karma Yoga that is unrelated to right perception, but is entrenched in the perception of difference. None who has, through the right means of perception, known the Lord as his very self, seeks to subordinate himself to anyone else or thing. That would be the state of somebody who in chapter 2 saw the truth. That would be self-contradictory. Therefore, the Lord begins to set forth the group of characteristics, verses 13 onwards, which directly immortalizes the worshippers of the imperishable who have secured right perception and who have renounced all desires. So from 13 onwards, what we read, we should take these as the characteristics of those who have directly who have worshipped the imperishable. So the first type, okay, and who have secured right perception. This is an important lead-in. So could you please read 13, somebody?
Sure. Adishva sarvabhutanam maitraha karuna evacha nirmamo nirahankara samadukha sukha chami.
Wonderful. Adveshta. Dvesham is hate. Adveshta, without hate. He hates no beings. Sarva bhutanam maitraha, friendly to everyone. Compassionate, karuna. He is rid of all sense of possession and egoism. Nirmamo nirahankara. No sense of I am the doer and no sense of possession. Sama dukkha sukha kshami. The same in pleasure and pain. And kshami, I would say forgiving, long suffering. Here it's translated as forgiving, kshami. That is pretty straightforward, right? He is long suffering, that is, reacts without emotion even when abused and smitten. Number 14.
Santushtaha satatam yogi yatatma drida nischayah mayar pitar mano buddhir yo mad bhaktaha same priyaha.
Santushtaha, he is satisfied, happy, without a break. Satatam, yogi, integrated, yatatma, self-disciplined, dridha nischayah, very steadfast resolve. Mai arpitam mano buddhihi, he has steeped his mind and intellect in me. Mad bhaktaha, and he is my devotee. Same priyaha, he is dear to me. Okay. So we can see that these are already very, very high qualities, right? Very difficult to actually have no hate for all beings. Very, very difficult. Right? Always friendly and compassionate, very difficult. Rid of sense of possession, very hard. Although we know that we are only renters in this apartment of the body, still we very easily we say this is mine. This is very hard to give up the nirmamo. And that I am the doer, nirahankaram. To be the same in pleasure and pain is hard. Definitely sadness affects us. And to be always forgiving is also hard. That's why they say to forgive is divine. Santushta, happy without a break. This is very hard because whatever we may say, sometimes there will be some desire, something will come up that makes us not happy. Integrated, yatatma, self-disciplined, and of steadfast. We can be self-disciplined for some time, but to be self-disciplined all the time is not easy. And firm in resolve. So these are obviously the ideal virtues of the one who has attained the imperishable. And he is my devotee. His mind and intellect are steeped in me, and he is dear to me. Let us read 15, and that is also very interesting, and then maybe we will take a stop. 15, please.
Yasmano dvijate lokaha, lokano dvijate chayah, harsha marsha bhayo dvegehi, mukto yah sacha me priyah.
That's very nice. This is a very important verse. Yasmat na udvijate loko. From him the world does not shrink away. Lokan no dvijatescha. He does not shrink from the world either. Right? This is why the often when sometimes people go to a Swami or sage and say, I want to run away to the Himalayas. This is running away. No, the Swami says, no, this is not the feature of the integrated one. Right? Integrated one is not running away from the world. He is free from harsha, marsha, from both harsha, elation, intolerance, bhaya, fear, udvegam, udvegaihi, muktaha. He is free from all these. Sacha me priya. So again, these are ideal states. Now, before we stop, one thing is we should not be struck by complete depression that these permanently, this is very difficult to attain, right? I definitely cannot claim all those qualities at all. Not even one of them probably permanently, right? And I think if we are all honest with ourselves as human beings, it's not easy to claim all those qualities permanently forever. So then what is the resolution? So the Lord is pointing a way. He's saying, this is a direction, right? This is an aspiration, right? And he is forgiving, right? So as long as one has faith that there is a Lord, a Phaladata, he has given his instruction. And as long as we follow that instruction to the best of our ability, Yatha Shakti, right? That is more than enough. Right? At the end of the day, so that's why the reflections in the morning and evening, that's why I say this Nitya Karma, Nitya Sadhana, is all we do is in the morning, even a small resolve. Today, let me try to live up as best as I can to these ideals. And in the evening, I did my best. Maybe I can do better tomorrow. With that, one closes the day. This is enough. Actually, that would be very powerful. Even Suduracharo will I can attest that many good things happen to Suduracharos also. All right. No doubt about this. So all I've come to say is that actually, that even being a very wicked person, by simply following and just reading the Gita 2 or 3 times and following these very simple principles, understanding they are aspirational, and so not flagellating ourselves if we cannot reach them in one day, right? Overnight, right? That's okay, right? But still the Lord does many good things, right? In spite of that, in spite of all the mistakes that I have committed and continue to commit, the Lord is very, very gracious and gives tremendous bounty of sweet things. They're not sweet in the first way imagined, right? We may have some conception of what would be a sweet life, but it's sweetness in unanticipated ways. I don't know how to explain that. It's like you set out on a trip and you think, we're going to go here and we are going to enjoy this kind of food and movie or whatever. You go there, the restaurant is closed, there's no movie, but you end up going on the beach and somebody brings you some nice fruits, you meet some sadhus and you have a beautiful instruction and you come home. It's not what you expected, but it was very delightful, right? This is the mystery and power of the Lord, is what I can say, right? He turns life on its head, but gives you something that you didn't expect. And it's beautiful, right? Does it make sense? Yeah. Achha.
God's plan is always the best plan.
Right. It's hard to always see that. It's hard to accept that. Definitely. It's not easy. It's definitely hard to accept that especially when something unpleasant happens, seemingly unpleasant. It's like, oh, how can this be true, But at least talking in Gita class and doing satsang and doing our daily practices gives that, makes it more possible. Any other comments or questions?
Basically, we're trying to change the habit, right?
Right. And yeah, I would say and accept. The other peculiar thing is sometimes, when the mind is very troubled and you actually reach out and talk to somebody else, you find that their troubles are 20 times larger. And you run back and say, oh my God, it's not, I should never have started complaining. They are bearing something 20 times harder. I should keep my trap shut. This happens quite frequently to me. So that's also very, I think, a nice way to see the Lord's play. Any other comments or questions?
So, Dr. Sankar, one question, and basically it's more of a different thought process here. Like it can be a different way of, like there are various ways to achieve this kind of state, right? There are not a single state that we are referring to here. There are various aspects we talked about, and one of the verse says that even you are too much devotees, like even you are not able to get sufficient time to do this all this dhyanam and other things. Mm-hmm. But if you are too much like independent devotee to your work itself, and if you think that work is basically towards God, and you are thinking that in that work itself there is a prayer going on, mm-hmm. Is it also sufficient, right? Or something is not sufficient, because that always says that no, you basically not towards this, not following all these practices and not doing all this like bhakti and other things. So you should be doing more and more those rather than doing your work itself.
It's a very good question. So personally, and this is just my experience, it may be very limited. What happens in today's world is, if you start doing that truly, right? You go into your work and you say, this is an offering to the Lord and I'm not going to be moved by anything. Slowly, what you start finding is that the true joy and peace you actually find in things like satsang. That in some sense, you need more of those other things to keep up that beautiful attitude. It's not easy to sustain that attitude just like that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this is what he meant, that he's the Sudurachara. He becomes a sadhu slowly because his direction starts to change, right? So if we take just this attitude, so tomorrow, let's say we try to do this. We go to work and we say, I will not be affected. Then at the end of the day, what you come back and, okay, there have been many ups and downs, some positives, some disappointments. The mind is naturally drawn to, oh, we read that in the Gita. Maybe I would like to read that verse again, or I would like to sit in meditation for 10 minutes, or I would like to do a little puja, So slowly that anchor becomes more important in order to keep that attitude in the work. So this is how the God plays his game. He says, "Look, follow my words, then I'm going to help you in these other ways." Right? And then suddenly you turn around and you look back 5 years before. Oh, 5 years back, I wasn't doing these things. I wasn't doing satsang regularly. I was not doing anything. And now suddenly I'm doing this. I'm, my lifestyle has changed, right? For the better, right? I'm still doing my work and all that, but definitely my lifestyle is, my support structure systems have changed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because without support systems, that attitude is not easy to maintain naturally, is what I find. Is that your common experience, right? In fact, so let's do, if you do it's a good experiment. Try to stop the support system for 2 weeks if one is not convinced, and see how you feel. And then come back to it. Okay. At my stage, I think it would be disastrous if I stopped my support systems. Even if I, probably miss satsang 1 week, it'll feel, I would at least want to do some dhyanam or something at that time. Right?
You're very right, Dr. Shankar. I can also speak from personal experience. I was in India for 3 weeks. I was busy with my sister's wedding. I didn't have time to, time for myself to calm myself down or do some pranayam. And because of that, there was like a lot of chaos in my head 2 weeks after coming back here. So now that I'm back, like completely, and now I have time and I'm back into my routine, it's much better.
Right. And of course, we have to do those things. Sister's wedding is important. These things will happen, right? But you can see that it's building a little battery charge in a way. And then it can be used in the world for good. Thank you. That is nice. You had an involuntary exercise of it.
Yes.
Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, very well. Then in that case, I will say Shanti Mantram and we'll meet again. Om Tachamyora Vranimahe Gatum Yajnaya Gatum Yajnapataye Daivi Swastirastu Naham Swastirmanushabhyah Urdhvam Jigatu Bheshajam Shanno Astu Dvipadehi Sham Chatushpade Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste, everyone. It was very delightful. So nice.
Namaste.
Today's satsang was very special. Namaste, Uncle. Enjoy the lovely summer evening and see you in a week.
Namaste.
Namaste.